Okay, why don't we get started? Welcome, good afternoon. I'm Michael Ash. I'm on the faculty of Public Policy and Economics at UMass Amherst. I'm also a co-director of the Energy Transition Institute here. And it's my pleasure to welcome you here to this Political Economy Research Institute event. I'm going to try to say fairly little. It's my pleasure to introduce Gus Speth. It is difficult to imagine a person who has had more impact on creating the environmental movement landscape of our lifetimes than Gus Speth. I'll just mention a couple of from just a staggering list of achievements and involvements. He was a founder of the Natural Resources Defense Council. He was dean of the Yale School of Forestry and Environmental Studies. He was chair of the President's Council on Environmental Quality during the Carter administration. He was administrator of the United Nations Development Program, and he was founder of the World Resources Institute. There's among many other important public activities. He is currently professor of law at the Vermont College of Law, as well as a senior fellow at the Democracy Collaborative, Demos, and the Tellus Institute. I could go on, but I will not. I will turn over the floor. This event is being recorded. It's my pleasure to welcome you. Thank you so much for joining us. Really tangled with wires, and if you're aware of them. And good to move. I will move this out of your way. Very much here, and there is also there the computer perfect filling a glass of water.
There's some wires back here. I'm going to trip over.
Oh,
no, that's all right. I'm going to move them.
These are the.
I trip without wires, so I don't need them really.
So let me
Hey, it's good to see everybody. Is this coming? I'll get a little closer. Thank you for showing up, and I appreciate it. I was thinking the other day, he could be younger by election day. I think about that, and I made a special note coming in to put the numbers on the pages. I actually have text. I'll try not to spend too much time in, but I numbered the pages because I wanted to begin with a little thing I wrote about an actual incident. I wrote a speech for a very senior politician in 1984, and this little thing I'll read you is sort of what happened. But it's the kind of when he was giving in the speech, but it's kind of what happens when you get to be an octogenarian, like some of us here. These things can happen to you. It's called Old Jack, but you may want to imagine some other senior politician with a similarly short name. It's called Our Jack. Through Jack's old brain, the ideas fly, hardly stopping to say goodbye. He has to talk to a big group. He wrote his text that follows suit. He wonders, did he brush his teeth? His teeth feel yes. To his relief, he did his tie, his shirt was white, ready to go, all seemed all right. But things came loose. Jack was midway. The pages were in disarray. He had no choice but to keep on reading. No one noticed, fears receding. It was over in the middle, and no one cared, not one piddle. The crowd, it cheered, they loved Old Jack. He was their man. No going back. Let me translate that into today's situation. as some of you may know, that I saw a little sign coming in, which I'd never seen before, but it said, UMass Amherst, and underneath it, what did it say? Be revolutionary. I like that. So I'll try. And what I'll try to do is to rescue some hope somewhere between despair on the one hand, which we want to avoid, and hopium, which we're all inclined to, and try to find this range for legitimate hope out there. And we face so many difficulties today. I'm sure you're aware of them well, and that it's become called the polycrisis. And the world has a version of the polycrisis, and we have a version of it here in the U.S., and we read about it every day, and it can get us down. We can say with confidence that the country is in deep trouble. The system that we have of political economy is certainly tilted towards production and profit and power, and not very much tilted towards people, place, and planet. And policies are hobbled further when a revered Constitution, when the famous checks and balances there really appear as clogs and barriers repeatedly to progress. And if that were not enough, the country's cleaved, as we see all the time now, with camps and trenches facing each other, and massive efforts expended for small gains, and they're often rolled back, as were so many of the climate initiatives that Trump inherited. So it's not easy to see where to turn in the face of all this. And the books are full of proposals. Lord knows, PERI, who I have great respect for over the years, has produced wonderful studies and reports on things that can be done. I've even written a few of these books myself. Some of the proposals are radical, some are merely reformist, but really good. And some are for the near term, some are for the long term. But, we know a lot about what should be done. We know a lot about what could conceivably be done. But the question is, how do we get anything done in the current context? And it's a big question. And it's one that I want to try to grapple with a little bit. And I'll, begin by digging a little more deeply into what I see as the problem. And I suspect a lot of this will be things that some of you agree with. So I'll give you a visual to start with. Think of our various policy communities, environment, national security concerns or global concerns, social and economic justice, community solidarity, concerns about democracy. Think of us, all of these little communities, as in their separate boats in the midst of swirling waters. And sometimes the little boats go forward and our little boats go backwards. And but to notice what happens is, if you look at it, this picture, we all tend to go in the same direction. And it's a rare thing when, progressives make great strides in one area and not in others. And if you look at the voting patterns in the Hill, you'll see this tremendous overlap between progressive action in environment and social issues and international affairs and other things. So my point is that our progressive communities tend to overlook these underlying currents that are driving all of our boats in certain directions, and mostly we've been struggling against the forces that are pushing us to stalemate or sometimes backwards. If we could identify these underlying forces, we could all come together as progressive different communities and join in opposing them. But the bad news is, of course, if you do identify these forces, the challenge to them can appear quite radical because they seem to be threats to the dominant system. And indeed they are. So I think to use the title of this organization and think about where do we begin this search for what these opposing forces, these underlying currents that we struggle against are, we'd have to begin by looking at the political economy that we work in and that we live with. And, I think it is probably widely appreciated here that political economy has certain driving features to it, certain fundamental objectives to it, ramping up GDP, growing corporate profits, focusing investments on high financial returns and not high social and environmental returns, keeping labor markets slack, promoting runaway consumerism, sustaining great bastions of corporate power and economic power, political and economic, and projecting abroad an overwhelming military strength. So this complex is a powerful system, reinforcing, and proposals to ameliorate some of its harsher side effects are routinely demonized as well. We know that those side effects, including neglecting the half of Americans that are just getting by, and the appalling disparities in wealth and income and opportunities, and just as appalling is the destruction of our climate and environment. And there are other sources of unwelcome currents pushing against the progressives. Our dominant values are decidedly materialistic, anthropocentric, contempocentric, individualistic, and our reigning constitutional interpretation is a terribly flawed originalism. And we know that our democracy, our tool for dealing with these issues, is at the point of major dysfunction. And of course, there's an ever-active military-industrial complex working away. So we can't kid ourselves, right? I think most of us probably appreciate how that our system really requires rebooting, deep transformative change in our political economy. It cries out for major revamping. One of my favorite people, the civil rights leader, William Barber, recently put it bluntly, transformation is what we need. And I think the shared background of these concerns is that our mounting problems as polycrisis stem not from episodic failures or neglects or immediate politics, but from deep flaws in the nature of our political economy. So we're challenged to imagine positive futures for the country. And many of them involve deep transformative change in our political and economic system. And many of us have been dreaming up these new systems of political economy. And I've edited a book of them about 28 different systems in a book called The New System Reader. But of course, the terrible reality is that we can dream up these things, but incremental progress is now a reach, even incremental progress, and requiring the greatest struggle for modest gains. There's very little going on that really addresses the problems that have placed America at the bottom of the OECD in almost all indicators, and below many non-OECD countries as well. So what can we do? Well, first, so I have some litany of things to go over and see what you think about these ideas. The first thing we can do is look for modest openings. The opportunities for progress will come up, and to seize those opportunities when they do arrive. I think we should especially look for what's been called non-reformist reforms. The reforms that look like reforms and are, but have the seeds of deeper change. And the one that always occurs to me it would be the adoption of a new system of national indicators, relegating GDP to a much lower priority in favor of indicators of well-being and progress that really reflected things that we care about. If we could transcend our GDP fetish, we can also begin to overcome our growth mania. The next thing I would, ask you to think about is the possibility of crises being so severe that they lead to sort of a punctuated equilibrium period, when the moments when previously impossible things do become possible, and they'll almost always be crisis driven. And we can be sure there'll be many crises coming down the pike at us, and we need to be ready. And Tad Homer-Dixon wrote a very good book on being ready for crises. And eventually, I think the polycrisis is going to drive increasing delegitimization of the current system. Thirdly, we can back leaders who really have the skill to mold the future, like FDR and Martin Luther King and others. There's a lot of focus on the grassroots movement and bottom-up change, and I want to turn to that in a second. But we can't neglect the huge role of effective leadership at the national level, and remember that leadership happens at all levels. The next thing I would, urge that we think about is that if we could, as I mentioned, the progressive energies are now siloed in our little boats. And if we could accomplish an unprecedented fusion of forces and create a much broader movement of movements, that could make a huge difference. And right now, communities are still very much in their own little boats. We can be sure to sustain journalism and scholarship. We need them both to keep truth alive and to keep our core values burnished. We can embrace our preachers and the prophets and those who elevate new values and elevate our battered spirits. And I think this is very important. We can hold each other tightly, especially think of today's young people and the rough future that they are going to face. And I think, by and large, they know it. So there are these paths to progress, but there's also some very positive and encouraging signs and avenues for engagement. And I want to share very briefly a list of about 8 of these areas to you. That's a daunting number, but I actually do it in 2 pages, so don't worry. I mean, first, there's a rebirth of protest in the country. I think activism is increasing. Labor activism is increasing. You just saw that. Activism among young people, unprecedented, I would say. Activism among the marginalized and the victims. So bring on more direct action. Secondly, doubts about the current order are multiplying, increasing, and the calls for transformative change are heard more and more. I love the climate banner, system change, not climate change. And it summarizes a great deal. So bring on the new system. There is the old aversion to any kind of socialist thinking is fading, especially among young people, and all the polls tend to show this trend. Economic democracy is in the air. So bring on the public and worker ownership. 4, recent affirmations of government action. For example, in the Inflation Reduction Act, challenge the hold of market fundamentalism. You may have seen Naomi Oreskes' new book on market fundamentalism and its history, and it's very gripping. But it is fading now, I would argue. Conventional wisdom that markets are good and government is bad is slowly on the way out. So bring on the people's government. 5, the menace of climate change is underscoring the imperative of big, effective government. We now see the truth that dealing with the climate issue is going to require a big, effective government. And the government that governs best is not the government that governs least. So, bring on big things like a ban on fossil development. The 6th, the paralysis at the federal level is at least partially countered by impressive initiatives in some states, and especially localities. There are great things happening in our communities around the country, many of them, and often these are surfacing in groups. For example, the New Economy Coalition has a membership of a couple of hundred now organizations across the country. The Solidarity Economy movement has brought together mapping even of solidarity economy initiatives across the country. And when we think more globally, 2 really interesting initiatives are collecting activists from around the world. One of them called the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, where I'm affiliated now, and another being the Donut Economy Lab process that Kate Raworth is leading. So, bring on the decentralization of concern out of DC, and let's rejuvenate as much as we can activity at the local and state levels. 7, I think the threat to democracy is now well appreciated. It's not creeping up on us unnoticed and unacknowledged. The more the reactionaries try to suppress the vote, the more citizens turn out to vote. So bring on a democratic renaissance. 8, as this polycrisis deepens, more and more people are seeing that the root of the problem is a misguided value system, and are searching for new values and new lives, new lifestyles to go with them. We need now not so much new analysis, although I would never discount important things there, but we need a spiritual awakening to a new consciousness. So we need to bring on the preachers and the prophets and the poets and the philosophers and call them to strike the chords of our shared humanity, of our close kin to wild things. So all is not lost. It's a close call, but there are some things to hang our hopes on, real hope, not hopium. But I want to stress in concluding that I believe the positive currents driving towards transformative change, while they are going to strengthen in the future, the real possibility is that this strengthening will be too slow and too modest to head off genuine catastrophes. And this possibility of too little, too late underscores, I think, the imperative of progressives of all stripes to leave the issue silos, to leave their little boats, and to come together and forge an unprecedented, mighty political force before it's too late, both for immediate action and for deep transformative change. So I think we need, above all else right now, a fusion of forces, a movement of movements, something that really would be new and could make a big difference. Well, thank you. That's my short enough. Particularly interested in, I used to have to talk, sort of have the, get a lot of questions that I used to pretend that I knew the answers to. I'm not going to do that to you. But I am interested in what you might think about what I've said and about other matters related to these things. And Michael is doing something here. Anyhow, let me just say, and once again, in conclusion, I've been a great admirer of PERI and its personnel for a long time, and I thank you for this opportunity to come here and talk. If more in the nature of comments, I'm sure if Repetto starts, it won't really be a question. It'll be a disguise or something.
Because historically, the kind of heat and taking place only after the bus ahead of road. Think of transition from
or Europe.
Think of Russia.
Or a lot in Europe.
So do you think need a revolution or?
We've already done that. No, I think it will be crisis driven, and certainly one interesting issue to me, and I'd be interested in what you think. I mean, there's a lot of talk about collapse out there now, right? A lot of articles written about the system is not going to make it, it's going to collapse. This whole, a lot of it is, some of it is as its sort of chapeau, the idea of a deep adaptation, not looking at shallow adaptation or tactical adaptation of staying out of floodplains and putting trees in cities and things, but systemic adaptation. And a lot of the literature or the readings that I've done in that area, you know, are based on the idea that the system really is, we're on the verge of a you know, the kind of collapse that could lead to transformative change. And that's what these authors are trying to write about. And we clearly do need to think more deeply about, you know, what has led us to the climate crisis. I mean, what is it about the current system that has opened the door to this god-awful set of developments that we're going to willy-nilly inherit and have to live with at this point? And that is a searching inquiry, which we haven't really spent a lot of time in the country dealing with. You know, what are the roots of the climate crisis, and how do we correct that? And part of what I'm talking about here is that. So I don't know, it'd be interesting to have anybody thought about whether we are on the verge of a collapse in our socio-economic and political system, and whether it's just in a secular period of decline, and whether something will come out of that. The novels are full of this, as you probably have read, and it's, you know, it seems to me you know, possible. I can't you know, dismiss it. Things are really, really bad. Yeah.
Thank you very much. About the price. I think those that
Yeah.
and there are no
Yeah.
within that,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there are probably several of those types of absolutely compelling concerns. And the one I have worked on and thought about the most is the climate issue. But if you look, Jimmy, just day before yesterday, or 3 major climate studies coming out, each one of them scary as the devil. I had a hand, I've had a sort of following role with the climate lab that Bezos Earth Fund and WRI have done together, and their conclusion, like day before yesterday, was that it was 42 transitions that they think are imperative to deal with the climate issue. We are way behind on 41 of them. I mean, really, I mean, this and other reports have come out. There was the government, you know, federal government did its big study of where we stand on climate today and what the threats are to the various parts of the country. And even Vermont is in trouble. So anyhow, it's going to be devastating. And if you look at the global, you know, trend lines in emissions and the buildup of greenhouse gases, they're unabated. I mean, they really are just linear anyhow, going up. If not, you know, not exponential now, but linear without any turning down globally. And that's methane and carbon and N2O. And we are down, you know, we are the biggest historical contributor, but we're down now to like 12% of the global greenhouse gas emissions in the US. So, 85% of it is outside the US. Some of that may be our imports, but still, there's this that could also galvanize energies across a broad front, and I think young people are realize what we're up against. I like this new group, but they all end up in jail. Called Climate Defiance. They're sort of to the left of Extinction Rebellion, which is sort of to the left of the Sunrise Movement. But they're getting arrested all the time. I think they just picketed or broke or disrupted some event that I don't know whether it was Schumer or some other leading Democrat having. They're not afraid to go after the Democrats on these issues either. And there are other concerns that might, if we could ever mobilize these issues together. Now, I've talked to some, leading figures in these areas, and at least a couple of them say, oh, well, that's not necessary. Yes, people whose names would surprise you have said it's not necessary. We will come together when we need to. I think it's that can happen, but I don't think it's the way to drive deep change, big changes in the country. I think you need a real fusion, a movement of movement. Goodness, this is my co-author, the only person who's ever let me write a book with him. Uh-huh.
World War II, gave to urban and fashion fast. But at several there, someone 2008 technical place.
Yeah, no, that's a
absolutely no change. That.
So what else do you think is necessary, Peter? What would complement the yeah. No, but it's a good question, it seems to be, yeah. Hi.
I think it's clear.
Spell the last name.
Oh. We talked about ways that also getting ready to reach out is hard. And how to be helpful.
Okay. We'll check out the book. No, I hadn't heard. Is this a recent book? Not that recent. Oh, yeah? Yeah. Well, this is, as you know, from what you're saying, and to complement these other areas that we're talking about, this is a huge, issue of the mental health crisis. And it was bad enough before people started having, trying to deal with all the disarray in our politics and in our society and everything from, corruption to crime and other things. I've been in touch with the new head of the public health school at Yale, and she's really seized with this concern. It's a huge source of new disease in the country, and so again, these things, we need to figure out a way to bring these different communities together. I have been to talk about this at NRDC. I've been to talk about it at WRI, my two old groups, both of which did a lot better after I left. And they, and I make these points about the fusion of forces, bridging into other groups, and they nod. And I think they have some appreciation, but they don't do it. And they are the, and then the plethora of smaller organizations are even less capable of that kind of reach and breadth. And so people are very issue, specific in their work. And I'm afraid we, in a sense, we contribute to that because we have our own issues and the foundations have their issues, and that they are very focused on particular concerns. And the one thing that I've heard about, and I'm not sure it's really working, is that the Congressional Progressive Caucus is trying to, they created a Progressive Caucus Center, a kind of an NGO that services them. And they have been trying to come up with a fusion agenda. And anything of that type that might bring the different constituencies together to fight for something, would be worthwhile trying, for sure. And but I don't know how much, good faith to invest in the operation. But they're trying. There's something going on there. You may remember the former head of the Institute for Policy Studies in DC, John Cabana. John is working with them now on that. Wish him well. Yeah. Yeah.
We are,
Right. Good.
learning about. You're trying.
Yeah, it seems very worthwhile. It's come got to be done. I was a little bit familiar with a coalition now of community-based, minority-focused organizations in the U.S. who have banded together to try to raid the Inflation Reduction Act billions and get some of that money down into local communities, frontline communities, groups that are working on fusing environmental rights and justice issues. So that struck me as a very wholesome, proposed initiative that they were pursuing. And there are enough of them, and they represent enough people, and they do have the constituents in Congress and some in the administration, so they might pull it off. Well, good for you, because I do think the things at the local level, just like, in most countries, these issues appear more as one big issue and one set of fused concerns and not isolated, separate things like they do to, the world that I've been living in. Yeah.
The last event. Aspect, but last 30 years of shaping environmental, but for guiding the next phase of environment, and both in NGO based and the large and the advice for large and NGO for environment for various happy with the structure.
Well, there is a lot of building. It's no longer back in my day, which I'm afraid was like the 70s. There were only so many big groups, but now there's this proliferation of local groups with local concerns, and there are thousands and thousands of groups. If we could figure out how to be sure that they got the support and empowerment that they needed, that could make a huge difference. And I'm not really sure that the big groups are malleable, flexible enough to. I've kind of given up there because I haven't seen it happening. They pick up some things, but I've tried to present certain particular issues to some of these groups, well, we have all these distinguished economists who have railed against the shortcomings of GDP and its measurement, and there are all these proposals, and have been accomplished, and Stiglitz and others have done these big international studies of trying to get the UN to change the systems of national accounts and other things, and that would be kind of a low-hanging fruit, you would think, for banding together to go after something important. Because if we really could ever start displaying, the way that GDP growth is not really showing growth across a whole bunch of other things that we imagine are good. But I haven't had any luck convincing them to take this up. Even some of the political issues. I mean, the mainline environmental groups are bedeviled today by our politics, our political failures. If you ask anybody, independent person, what are the big environmental concerns, or should be the big environmental concerns? Well, I think the first thing on the list would be our failing democracy and our inability to get a functioning political system that can do things. I mean, that's an environmental issue, but they don't see it that way. And they have some, they have their reasons, but I don't agree with them. Yeah.
No.
Right.
Some funders do.
Well, it's lobbying, but you still can't do zero. You can't do anything on electioneering. Right?
But
So
even some prohibit talking. So
oh, it's huge.
People that were they're wearing
No, I know. Well, sometimes at night, laying there trying to go to sleep, I have this fantasy that these rules are unconstitutional conditions. on exercise of First Amendment rights. I mean, there is an old doctrine, you know, that you can't provide a federal benefit on condition that people forego their constitutional rights, particularly First Amendment rights. And I haven't read about it lately, so I don't know. But it really have, yeah, and that and the filibuster ought to be unconstitutional. And yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And so what I have urged, and this is not because of my urging, but just because of common sense, is beginning to happen. You do see groups like NRDC creating action funds and promoting them now as never before, and encouraging people to forego their deductions and just give to the action funds. And I've even told them, again, they haven't listened, but you know, to advertise it that way, say, you know, put that, you know, just if you were going to give $1 million to NRDC C4, well, give 700,000 to the action fund. You know, come out in the same place, but you know, you're going to have a much bigger impact, arguably. Yeah, I agree. You know, I think I hope, by the way, you'll go after the wood pellet industry. You did. Yay! Well, they were destroying the southern forest, among other things. Yeah, yeah. Thank you. Well, let me just mention one thing. To the best of my knowledge, the leaders of the whole of different constituencies, right, don't sit down on a regular basis. It was hard enough at one time to get the so-called green group together, where the heads of the big environmental groups were meeting, 20 of them or so. But why can't they sit down? I mean, you know, the famous story about the right, you know, was that they met all the time together, regardless of their particular concerns. And the meeting was chaired by, what's his name? What was his name? The famous, we want to shrink government down to, so Grover Norquist, which was the chair of these meetings, and they met in some, you know, think tank in DC on a regular basis and plotted, you know, not everything, including the language that they would all go out and use the next day. And, you know, but that, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but that's you know, that's a part of what could happen. That is what? Oh, I did talk about scholarship a couple of times, because well, you know, it's absolutely essential that we have, you know, everything from look at the outpouring of science on the climate issue. And you know, that's just, it's phenomenal what's happening, and how much good science there is. And you know, for years we were saying that some of us that the scientists should come out swinging, the climate science, and should be more vocal in their commentary about what was going on. Well, that's happening now. I mean, I think the climate scientists are alarmed and are saying so repeatedly now. And so There's probably, in my view, too little academic critique of the deeper issues. So, I mean, in terms of political economy issues, I'm not that familiar with what PERI's been doing, lately, but they're just in general, speaking about it. I would, there are a lot of interesting things being done in terms of thinking about the deeper problems in the political economy, but it seems to me there could be a lot more of it. And in terms of economics per se, the books, there are now a lot of books, some of which I've reviewed, critiquing the today's dominant thinking in the economic departments. What do I know? I haven't been in an economic department in years, but people like John Erickson at Lund Institute and at UVM have, and the many others now have written books. I mean, I go back and look at the Samuelson and Nordhaus text, right? And it says right there, the purpose of macroeconomics is to grow the economy. Full stop. And then they talk a little bit about, in the sort of prefatory language about trade cycles and other things. But it really is the real pitch and the claim in the book, which taught generations of people, was that the purpose is to grow the economy. And and then today in the news, I think it was today, there was a major article about all of the things that people are doing to reduce emissions. And there've been a lot, right? A lot of wind, a lot of solar, a lot of other things. It's being overwhelmed by the growth. So things are getting more efficient, but the growth is overwhelming the efficiency. So the net is still bad and worsening. So I think there doesn't seem to be enough challenge to the growth mentality. Great economists for generations have said things like who was it, Kenneth Boulding, only madmen and economists think that infinite growth can go on infinitely. Anyhow, we're still it's still the be all and end all of economic accomplishment in the country, and it really needs to be challenged a lot more, I think, from the economic. And Nordhaus gets this Nobel for proposing really misguided things about the amount of greenhouse gas buildup we can tolerate. And, I think it's anyhow, there's some real problems there. And you're better able in this department to, figure out how to deal with it and or whether there's, which I don't really know, whether there's some melting around the edges of these previous orthodoxies, and people are, and it's not, if you take macroeconomics today, maybe that's not what you beats me. Yeah.
You'll ask for